Welcome to ISEE AWPC Career and Research Talk webinar. I'm Xiao, and I'm your host today. I'm an executive counselor and the chair of the Education Subcommittee at ISEE AWPC. I work at the School of Population Health, UNSW, Sydney, Australia, as an associate professor in urban health and environment. The aim of the career and the research talks is to regularly connect ISEE AWPC members and inspire earlier and mid-career researchers in environmental epidemiology. I would like to thank for my colleagues and ISEE AWPC executive counselors, Julie, Asuku, Xiaowei, and VGF support. Today, we have guest speaker, Professor Mark NIEUWENHUIJSEN, with us talking about his career path and sharing some of his new research. Please follow us via Twitter at ISEE AWPC and our website for forthcoming events. If you would like to provide feedback or nominate speakers, please email me, xiaoqi.feng@unsw.edu.au. Before we start the seminar with Mark, I would like to show my respects and acknowledge the Bandico people who are the traditional custodians of the land, of elders past, present, and emerging on which this meeting takes place, Kensington, Sydney. Today's seminar has three parts. In the first 20 to 30 minutes, I will have a chat with Mark about his career journey. Then Mark will give a short presentation on his research, how to make sustainable, livable, and healthy cities. You can ask questions by typing in the Q&A chat window. I will read out your questions to Mark for him to answer after his presentation. ISE members will already know Professor Mark NIEUWENHUIJSEN is a world-leading expert in environmental exposure assessment, epidemiology, and health impact assessment with a strong focus and interest on healthy urban living. For those of you who are new to ISEE and may be thinking of joining us, Mark is the president of the International Society of Environmental Epidemiology, the IICE. Mark has co-authored more than 450 papers published in peer-reviewed journals and 35 book chapters. In 2018, he was awarded the ISEE John Goldsmith Award for outstanding contributions to environmental epidemiology. In both 2018 and 2019, he was among the top 1% most cited scientists in the world. Welcome, Mark.
Hello.
Hello.
Lovely to be here.
Thank you, Mark. And also thanks, Suki, and I'm glad that now you can hear us. So now you should be able to see Mark. So, Mark, I'm just wondering, did you always know that you wanted to be a professor in environmental epidemiology?
Yeah, no, I don't think so. You know, when I started off about 30 years ago, I'm not sure that there was so much environmental epidemiology around. Probably I didn't even know what it was. I actually, I did an environmental science degree, and within that I focused on environment and health, and in particular on occupational epidemiology, occupational hygiene and epidemiology. So I started off in that, and also my PhD was actually also in occupational hygiene and epidemiology. And I thought that I was going to be an occupational epidemiologist, but that didn't work out so well, and that's why I ended up in environmental epidemiology.
Well, I think actually you're doing great. And so, Mark, where did you do a PhD? And I'm wondering, did you have any earlier influencers or role models when you were a student or a postdoc?
Yeah, I mean that I did my PhD at the National Heart and Lung Institute in London. What is nowadays it's part of Imperial College, but at the time it was an independent institute. And my PhD was around occupational asthma, particularly around Baker's asthma and also laboratory animal allergies. And for that, what we did, we measured the allergens in the air and tried to see if there was some kind of exposure response relationship in terms of, you know, if you were exposed to more of these allergens, were you more likely to develop or to become allergic and to develop occupational asthma. So that was the program at the moment, and that my supervisors at the moment were Kate Venables, Tony Newman-Taylor. I mean, the people that were there at the time were quite influential. In that way, yes, I looked up to them, and that was good. And then after my PhD, I went to the US, to California, and I was working in agricultural health with Mark Schenker there. And I must say that, you know, at that time I thought that I was going to, that's what I said, going to do occupational epidemiology. But then when I returned to the UK, after a couple of years of postdocs, I went to Imperial College and I tried to do some occupational studies, and I didn't get funded for any of the proposals I put in. And then I put in a few environmental epidemiological proposals in, and they got funded. So that's got me on the way to doing environmental epidemiology. Some of my big examples at the time were my former teacher, also Bert Brunekreeft, who is at ERAS, or was at ERAS in Utrecht, and also Paul Elliott, who was working at the Imperial College, quite a solid researcher there as well, and quite well known.
Fantastic. Well, it seems that, you know, I think this is really probably great share with particularly earlier medical researchers. And sometimes it may be not quite work well as you planned, but when you move slightly to a different field and it's actually doing really well, and I think, you know, we will talk a bit more about that. I know, Mark, that you're working at IS Global in Barcelona. I have been there. It's a beautiful place. Can you please tell us about your roles at IS Global?
So I'm at IS Global. I'm one of the senior researchers here. So I've got my own research group with about 15, 20 people in it. So my role is trying to find funding to keep my research going and keep them employed. You know, most of my staff are on soft money, so it's continuously I need to look for funding, finding opportunities to take things forward. Besides that, I'm also the director of the Air Pollution and Urban Environment Program. We have a number of senior researchers within that. We look in particular at the exposure assessment, environmental epidemiology, and health risk assessment of environmental pollutants and exposures. And then I'm also the director of the Urban Planning, Environment and Health Initiative, what is our knowledge translation arm around urban and transport planning and health in cities. So in this, what we're doing in the initiative is picking up what we've learned from our research and make it digestible for stakeholders, and we're reaching out to stakeholders to try to actually make an impact. Because that's often quite difficult. You know, we do a lot of research, but, you know, does it actually help or not, or does it make an impact? It's not often not, because we're not, you know, we're too busy doing research, so we can't do the outreach, we can't go to the community and make a difference. And that's what we're doing with this knowledge translation and initiative. Furthermore, I'm part of the senior management, so we have a senior management committee that I attend, and also the budget committee that looks at the budget of the institute. So these are some of the main activities that I'm doing here at IS Global.
Wow. Well, it's so great to hear, you know, that you're working with essentially the policymaker and not only, you know, produce the high quality scientific research, but also working with and hopefully to change the city. But also that, Mark, I sensed out that you could have a really, really busy day, and it would be even difficult to probably find time to relax, sleep. And so how do you balance, you know, all these roles that you have with the IS Global and your responsibilities also as the president of ISEE?
Yeah, no, it's, yeah, I'm quite busy, but It's also, I think it's often about prioritizing, because, you know, so easily you can do a lot of things and keep going and going. And one of the things what I learned early on in my career is to make decisions very quickly and stick to them, never regret making a decision. Also make lists and prioritize things just to make sure that the important things get done, and also only do things that you actually can have an input or control somehow, that other things that are going on. Then I've got also a fairly basic rule that I don't work after 7 at night or on the weekends. So I try to put everything in my during the day and give myself enough rest at night or over the weekend. You know, occasionally I end up having some meetings, particularly if I have meetings with the US because of the time difference. Sometimes they're at night, but I try to avoid them. And I think the other thing is, you know, being lucky and having a very good team. I mean, my kind of management style is also give a lot of responsibility to the people that work for me. Let them get on with things. We discuss things and they get on with things. You know, it's of course it's not for everyone, but for me, it's kind of in my team. I select the people that can do this, and that seems to work quite well. I mean, they seem to enjoy it. They seem to have like the responsibility, get on with things, and that's, I think, for me how it works. I mean, other people have different management style that like to control more, be involved in the details, but that's not for me.
Well, I think what you just mentioned here, you know, I think it's very important that I personally feel it takes time that to work out, you know, where to draw a line about the life and also the work balance, and also, you know, being a team leader to give authorities and also trust the team members and also give them space to develop. I think this is a really great tips. Can you tell us a bit about ISEE? Just given we probably have members that's the first time they actually join us for a seminar.
Yeah, that's welcome to everyone. That it's a great honor to be the president at the moment of IIC, the International Society for Environmental Epidemiology. I think we're the leading organization worldwide around environmental epidemiology. We organize our annual conference. It's one of our main events, but besides that, we've got many other activities. If you go to our website, you can have a look what there is. We're organized into different committees and different chapters. So we have a number of different committees, for example, the policy committee, the ethics committee, and so there's a range of different committees that our members take part in. Also the conference committee, of course, organizing the conference. And then we have chapters what represent regional members. So at the moment we're at the Asia chapter, but we also have the African chapter, Latin America chapter, Europe chapter, North American chapter. And within these chapters there are also many activities taking place. They're run by themselves, often organize sometimes meetings, webinars like this. So there's a lot of activity going on. And I think the nice thing, or the most important part of the society, is that it brings people together. It's a network, so it's good to link up with others. I mean, you can get in contact with people easier. Also, when you come to the conferences, you can have a fairly good idea what is the cutting edge research, what are the new methods that are being used, what is, you know, what makes a difference. And I think that's always very exciting. I must say, most of our members are wonderful people. I mean, it's also, the conference is a social event. Unfortunately, this year we had to do it online as a virtual meeting, but hopefully in the future we get back to in-person meetings, so we actually can talk to each other. If you want to become active, you know, there are lots of opportunities to become active and take part in what is going on. Also, at the moment, we're looking for nominations for the Asia chapter. The Asia chapter has one counselor on the main council of IIC. We're looking for a new counselor for the next 3 years. If you by any chance interest, you want to be active, please let me or you know. that you want to be active, and we can go for nomination and for election over the next few weeks.
Great. Thank you very much, Mark. You're obviously a very successful researcher internationally. Are there any particular strategies you have used to develop your international research collaboration?
No, it's you know, one of the things is that in Europe we have a strong incentive or a research environment for collaboration. As you know, most of my research actually comes from Brussels for the European Union, and when you take part in consortia, there needs to be at least people from 4 countries involved in the research. So all the research proposals and projects that I'm involved in, or most of them, are collaborations, international collaborations within Europe in particular. And this has helped the European Union a lot of bringing people together. I mean, and improving the research. It's quite amazing how things have developed over my career. When I started off 30 years ago, you know, the people were working in their little groups. This program started of collaboration, and now you know, everyone collaborates. I mean, and so that makes it easier. So that's why we're international, and why we have a very strong critical mass here in Europe, and doing some excellent research. I think this also is one of the reasons why I have quite a few publications, because I get involved in lots of research. We're sharing a lot. There's a very collaborative environment. Of course, the other thing is I don't do very much teaching, so I'm not burdened by that. I'm teaching at the moment, but it's not so many hours, what makes a difference as well, of course. But I think the funding mechanism that we have here in Europe is very supportive of international research, what's important. Besides that, I do some work with people in Australia. I'm working at Australian Catholic University, doing some work there. I'm having some colleagues in the US, where I'm doing some work with that. So there is other links as well. Again, I mean, the ISEE helps very much setting up collaborations, or getting to know people, setting up collaborations, and working, doing the networking. So in that way, it's a very good organization to be at.
Thank you, Mark. And I do agree. I think the international collaboration, or even domestic collaboration, is always very nice, and to learn from each other and being productive. So I know today probably we have quite a lot of researchers. They are not only quite productive as earlier career researcher, but have the challenges such as publish their first paper or get their first grant. But I think we also probably have quite a lot of, let's say, mid-career researchers who just become a research leader, leading small or mid-sized of teams. So I'm wondering, what are some of the big challenges you have encountered as a research leader that you would like to share with us?
Well, our big challenge, I think, or the biggest, is finding funding for our research. I think we're all very creative people, have great ideas, but then to get the work done, we need to find some funding. And, it's, to be honest, it's very tough to be in research at the moment, because you get many disappointments. I mean, even for me as being a researcher, I mean, I put in 10 or 20 proposals and I may get 1 or 2 funded. You think you're doing absolutely brilliant research, or write a brilliant proposal, but that may not be good enough to get funded, because there are many others that write good proposals. I mean, it's the same with finding faculty positions. It's not so easy. There are many people going for the same positions, and unfortunately, I think it's become a little bit of luck rather than actually hard work as such. Because I mean, of course, it's hard work. I mean, I think it's kind of nowadays more a numbers game. You just apply for many jobs, or you submit a lot of proposals. The same also when you submit publications. You submit a lot of papers somewhere at different journals, and hope that some actually get funded, or you get the job, you get funded for your proposal, or your paper get published. And it's a very tough environment, and I think one of the important thing is to deal with disappointment and being turned down, and just forget about it and move on and go for the next one to keep going. I mean, I think that's one of the things that for me, I tend to forget the disappointments and just go for the successes, remember them. And of course, in our profession, we have many more disappointments than successes, to be honest. But we keep going, and fortunately, I think, like for myself, I'm involved in absolutely brilliant research, what I really love. I get my publications out. I'm lucky enough to get sufficient funding to keep going. I work with an amazing group of people here at the Institute, so it gives a lot of satisfaction in that way as well. But, you know, I know it's very tough for many people out there trying to have similar success as what I have at the moment. So.
Thank you, Mark. I think what you just said, you know, it's really is the reality is the same, and you know, I'm sure it's everywhere in the world, especially given the pandemic, COVID, and where is the budget cut off, and probably it's about research funding. So I think it's probably to a lot of audience is on some point it's good to hear that even the top researchers like yourself, you submit a lot of grant applications or even papers, still could get rejected or didn't get funded. Because most of the time people heard is that, oh yeah, you get a new project funded, another beautiful name and of the project. And so thank you for sharing with us, and also great to hear that we just need to keep calm and keep going, looking about the positive side and try our best for the next opportunity. So thank you. So I'm just also wondering, what are some of the things you have found most rewarding about working as an environmental epidemiologist so far?
Yeah, I kind of quickly come back to the publications as well, because I know a lot of people struggle with publications, and I want to bring out, I'm also an editor of a journal, editor-in-chief, Environment International. Many of you may know it. I mean, we've published quite a lot of work around environment and health, there. And so I see that I'm involved in both sides. I'm a researcher that submits publications. I need to go sometimes to 4 or 5 journals to get my papers published. And I see it as an editor, for 90% of the papers that come to Environment International get turned down. So only about 10% make it. Again, I mean, you often deal with more disappointment than success in this kind of. I think the thing is just to keep going and find a good place for your publications. I think that's quite important. And then, for me, one of the big satisfaction of doing the work is actually getting papers published. I mean, for me, work doesn't count until it's published. I mean, as a researcher, I'm very much aware that I need to publish, get it out in the academic literature, so my peers can look at it. On the other side, as part of my knowledge translation, I want to get the research out to the stakeholders, in particular in cities. I work around cities, around urban and transport planning, environment and health in cities. And so I want to get out. So I want to reach a lot of people. So I need to repackage the messages. I want to talk to, city councillors. I want to talk to urban planners, transport planners, and tell them what is their impact, or when they plan cities, when they plan transport systems, that have a huge impact on public health, and they should take that into account when they do the planning. And it gives me great satisfaction a little bit later in my talk. I'll go on about this, is to actually be able to make a difference. I mean, I live in a wonderful city, but it can be improved. We can improve in terms of improving the transport system. I mean, at the moment, like in Barcelona, we have high air pollution levels, we have high noise levels, we have heat island effects, we don't have so much green space, people don't do enough physical activity. And so we know that these kind of things have to change, have to lower the air pollution levels. And, I think it's extremely important that you do it evidence-based, and so we're producing the evidence. What if you implement this or that? How many lives can you save? How many people with disease can you prevent? And I think that's very satisfactory that we can do this, and that actually some of the messages are being implemented. What you see, I mean, we see, like, for example, in Barcelona and many other cities in Europe, more cycling lanes. What, you know, if you get people to cycle rather than using the car, they get more physical activity. It's healthy for them, but of course, there at the same time you have less air pollution, less CO2 emissions, less noise, and all these kind of things. What is very important as well. And I think, you know, making our cities carbon neutral, livable, and healthy is extremely important. And that gives me a lot of satisfaction that I can contribute a little bit to this. You know, I'm not having the only one that's influencing this, but I'm part of a community that's trying to do this, and show what is the importance. You know, behind you, you've got this wonderful picture of this beautiful park with a pond. I mean, that we know that we all would like to be there rather than sitting in our offices and walk around that park. And so we need to be careful that they don't put a lot of the tall buildings in there, that the background of view, we need to prevent and make sure that we have enough green space in our cities that people can enjoy. We know that they're extremely important for health.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mark. You know, I same as you. I just feel being environmental epidemiologists, especially the work we are doing, there's potential to have some small contributions we can do, benefits other people, but also as part of the community, and we can also enjoy it. And I think you have been very humble, you know, to talk about your contribution. I think you're doing an amazing job with your colleagues and team. So I guess I want to hear that. How do you see environmental epidemiology evolving over the next 10 years?
First of all, I think there is a need for environmental epidemiology. The question, will be there enough funding for it? I think, you know, we only can do things when there is enough funding. And with the current COVID crisis, we don't know what's going to happen. I mean, the future is uncertain in a way. Do people recognize that environmental epidemiology is important? Will the funding go there, or will it go to other things? So I think we need to make a strong case and show that it's extremely important. I think over the last, you know, 10, 20 years, we've very much done extremely well. We've done some really interesting research. You know, and perhaps it's research what we didn't think about before, what is being done, thinking about green space and health. I mean, initially it was done by environmental psychologists, and then for the last 10 years it's been taken up by the environmental epidemiology community with great success in doing this. But then there are other things as well. I mean, we've developed new concepts like the exposome, where we look at the totality of exposure, environmental exposures that people have been are exposed to, and how it influences health. And I think, you know, we moved on from this kind of concept of one exposure, one health effects, to multiple exposures and multiple health effects. We've been able to participate in cohort research, both for children and adult cohorts, where we can have brought in the environmental aspects. And we know that, you know, environmental factors are responsible for a large burden of the disease and mortality that we're actually seeing. So it's extremely important to address this, that, you know, now people know that air pollution is a major problem in the world in terms of health, with, you know, depending what you think of, kills 4 to 9 million people each year. So I think what we see is that if there is sufficient funding, we can keep going. Also, what we have seen now, there's more and more data becoming available that we do the studies with. Within the exposome researches, you know, we're looking at a whole range of different exposures, but also we're using omics data to see, look, what are the biological pathways. What is, I think, very exciting as well. So there's more and more data is becoming available. Our challenges will be, you know, what do we get out of the data? Can we help to improve public health? I mean, we always have to remember that our final aim is to improve public health, to prevent people getting ill or dying prematurely. And we need to keep that in mind and just, you know, set up our studies in such a way that we can address these particular questions. And a few years ago, we wrote a paper. It's by Catherine Tonnen and another group around it. It's called The Future of Environmental Epidemiology. We published it in Environment International, so you may have a look at that to see some of the trends that we're predicting over the next 20, 30 years.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, and we shall have a look. So if you could speak to yourself when you were an earlier to mid-career researcher, knowing all that you do now, what advice would you give yourself?
You know, it's funny. I've moved around a little bit, probably, and the situation was quite different. You know, when I started off kind of 30 years ago, when I was doing my PhD, there were not many people doing a PhD. I mean, also when I got my first lectureship at Imperial College, not many people had a PhD when they started lecturing, and you know, so I fell into things. You know, it's kind of easy. Today it's so competitive. I mean, there are so many people around. You need to know so much, and I think in a way, you know, in the situation that I come to, where I'm now, I wouldn't never have thought that I would be in a way. I mean, also I started off in occupational epidemiology, what I said, and then for my first 10 years also, when I was more in environmental epidemiology, I looked at water contaminants, chlorination, byproducts, and health effects. I mean, I built a name up in there, up in this, and then now it's only for the last 10, 15 years that I focus more on cities, in particular exposures within cities and health. And I think I probably couldn't have planned it. I mean, but what I did was, I think I took the opportunities that came along. I always think, you know, within life, you've got different opportunities that come along, and you take some or you don't. I mean, that with a bit of luck, you end up with a very nice career, and you do the things you want to do. I mean, and you really enjoy them, and I very much enjoy the topic that I'm working on at the moment. So yeah, looking back, I don't know if I could do this, what kind of advice I would give myself. I have no idea, to be honest. That the main thing is enjoy life, I think, and enjoy work.
Well, Mark, actually, I think you just gave us, at least I feel I heard at least a couple of things here are very important. One is you mentioned that you may not quite say predict what's going to happen exactly. You have some plans, but it may come something slightly different, and you just you know, pick it and make the most from it. And we actually have something particularly described that in Chinese. It's called a 随遇而安. It means whatever kind of the circumstances you are in, and you just cycle with it. But the other thing I also heard from you is that it's kind of like trying to take the opportunity, but also be positive. So I think those things probably really build your success, plus many, you know, other things, and also your hard work. So that's all my questions. I also want to ask the audience, please feel free to tap in your questions to Mark. I will ask Mark after his presentation. So thank you very much, Mark, and your answers have been very inspiring and helpful, I think, to many of the audience today, including myself. So now I would like to over to you, Mark, to learn more about your new research on how to make sustainable, livable, and healthy cities.
Thanks so much. So yeah, I brought it already up a little bit in, wait, now I need to see how I do the presentation, of course. I need to share the screen with you.
Sure.
So I brought up already.
Perfect.
Can you see it?
If you can show the slide, yep. Perfect, that's great.
Yeah?
Yep. Fantastic.
So I already addressed some of my work. My ongoing work at the moment is around cities. I mean, around urban and transport planning, environmental exposures, and cities. So just to put you a little bit in context, as we know that many people die each year as a result of air pollution. Cities are hotspots for air pollution. Depending on which estimates you believe, it's between 4 and 9 million people die, but also at the same time, many people die because of lack of physical activity. More than 3 million. It's incredible when you think about it. But a lot of times people don't have time to do physical activity, and a relatively small percentage of people actually reach the WHO guidelines for physical activity. In particular, in lower middle income countries, there are still many people die because of traffic fatalities, over 1 million. I mean, the situation is not good. And of course, at the same time, what we have the climate crisis, rising temperatures, extreme weather events. We still have population growth in particular certain part of the world. And other parts of the world, we see aging, a reduction probably in population growth, but aging population. So, and then what we see in lower middle income countries in particular, more further urbanization, with 70% of the people living in cities soon. We've just gone over 50%. So these are some of the trends that we're coming across. We've got nowadays a fairly good understanding that's about that there is a relationship between how we design a city, how people get around, what that may lead to in terms of environmental exposures or lifestyle factors, and how this leads to morbidity or mortality. I did a couple of reviews lately, and for this, to give you an example, I think if you design a city for cars, for people to use cars, what you're going to get a lot of people using cars, that leads to air pollution, leads to noise. The car infrastructure leads to heat island effects, particularly in warmer countries. Also, car use leads to more stress, less social contacts, and in particular, less physical activity. So this leads to disease and mortality. On the other side, if you design a city for active transportation, say for cycling, if you put in a lot of cycling lanes, you get people more to cycle, causes less air pollution, less noise. Cycling lanes take up less space, so you get less the heat island effects, what you may get. Also, cyclists are less stressed, they have more social contacts, in particular also they have more physical activity. So this reduces disease and mortality. So I think this knowledge is there, but of course we still need more, in particular going from the link from urban design to environmental exposures, because within environmental epidemiology we've always been studying the link between air pollution and disease and mortality, noise, and etc., and not going back to the determinants of the determinants, and I think that's kind of important. Now, of course, also what we have at the moment is the COVID crisis, what we're all suffering from going through the pandemic, or some people have suggested the syndemic. There's this new term for this because it seems to affect certain parts of the population more, on people with underlying disease, with NCDs. I mean, many people that die of COVID have some comorbidity. Also, it's the elderly what are being affected. And so what we see also for the COVID crisis, some of the important things for this is that we keep distance from each other. So this also makes us question about the public space, what we have and how we use it in a way. In many cities, public space like roads are being taken up by cars, and there's not enough space for people to walk or cycle. And so that's one of the important parts of it, that what's going on. And so we have this crisis, and it's the idea is that you never let a good crisis go to waste, and that you use the crisis to think about what to do and come up with future with changes and future ideas. And I think I would like to talk about a few of the ideas that are around in terms of urban design that may help respond to the crisis in the future. Oops, sorry. And also make the cities more carbon neutral, livable, and healthier. So some of the solutions, I think what we're looking at is land use changes, reduction in car dependency, because many of our cities, what we see, there's a strong car dominance, a move towards public and active transportation, and also greening of cities as some of the measures to improve things. So first of the things, what we're looking at, if you think about new urban models, or perhaps it's not completely new, but what we should put more emphasis on is on the compactness of cities. What we've seen too often is that we get a lot of sprawl. You're in a city, I think you're in Sydney, or if you look in Melbourne in Australia, many of the American cities, they're very sprawled, very extensive. So people have to travel long distances to come from their work, from their home to their work. And, you know, the car is the only way to do this because there is no public transport, etc. So, you know, one of the ideas is to make our cities more compact, increase the density in terms of buildings and people, reduce distances and increase diversity. So increase the land use mix that people work and live and shop. You know, all these things are kind of mixed together. Mark Stevenson did this research with 6 different cities around the world where he looked for if you make the cities a bit more compact, 30% more compact, you know, what would be the impacts on health? And he estimated that you could save between $400 and $800 per year per 100,000 people if you would make the cities more compact. And DALYs are the disability adjusted life years, what bring together the years of life saved and years of living with disease. So I mean, there's an impact on health, and of course what we also know, there's an impact on sustainability, because more compact cities, their CO2 footprint is much lower, carbon footprint is much lower than sprawled cities. Another urban form that's been presented is what we call the Barcelona Superblock. On the Barcelona, like many cities, has a grid system. On the left, you see the current system, one-way streets for cars, for motorized transport, going up and down, left or right. The idea of the Superblock is to cut off 4 junctions, and motorized traffic is not to pass through there. Of course, you can take your car in there and park it, but you can't drive through it. But give the best space back to the people for walking, for cycling, and also for green space. The idea is to implement 500 Superblocks in Barcelona. At the moment, there are 3 of them. We did a health impact assessment. What would be the health impacts of this if we would implement them? And we found that this would reduce air pollution, it would reduce noise, it would reduce heat island effects, it would increase green space, and also would increase physical activity. And we estimated that we could prevent 700 premature deaths each year in Barcelona if this Superblock would be implemented. And I think, you know, you could do this in many other cities in the world as well. This is one of the Superblocks. So this Sant Antonio. On the top, you can see what was before, cars passing through, and below you can see what was after. The photo was taken in the afternoon, so not many people around. But you can give you some idea that there are no cars around, but there's much more green space, and there is also more space for people to walk. Another new urban model is the 50-minute city. It's being promoted by Carlos Moreno in Paris. It's the idea that all our activities, what we do, where we work, where we do entertainment, the shops, are within a 50-minute walk within your residence. I mean, so this is kind of, you know, really changing how we see our neighborhood. And also where people live. I mean, too often people have to commute 1.5 hours to go to their work in a car or by public transport. I mean, the 50-minute cities say, no, you would, you know, all your activity, your work, etc., will be within a 50-minute walk. Of course, this asks for dramatic changes in how we see cities where people live, and there will be much more a mix of different social economic groups. I mean, at the moment we see a lot of zoning in cities where you have richer areas, poor areas, but this also would say that it brings a lot of people together. So I think this is a very nice idea as well. The other thing is to look at a car-free city. I mean, Hamburg says they're going to be car-free by 2034. It's got many benefits as well, of course, what I mentioned before, but also needs a rethink of how we see cities. I mean, and many cities are starting to pedestrianize, make their city centers car-free, but not the whole city yet. So we know there are many advantages of pacified city centers, people coming, visiting is much more pleasant, less air pollution, less noise, and this kind of things. And if you think, is it possible? Yes, it's there are some neighborhoods. This is Vauban in Freiburg. It's a car-free neighborhood with sustainable housing, a wonderful place actually to live. Lots of green space, no car in sight. People walk around, cycle around, and there's a good tram line to the city center of Freiburg. That, of course, what I have in common, these different forms, is trying to get rid of the car, because I must say there's a movement saying from, oh yeah, air pollution is a big problem in cities, but we just get the electric car and then the problem is gone. Now, to some extent, yes, it's true, you don't have NO2 emissions. What is a big NOx emissions? What's a big problem, of course, in cities? But particulate matter, probably only reduce the tailpipe particulate matter. Half the particulate matter is coming from brake, the wheels. I mean, this kind of thing. So you will still have particulate matter. Also, if you use a car, you don't get physical activity. It's still a car, and you sit there. And also, many cities have a lot of infrastructure that's needed for the car. Cars take up a lot of space for parking, for driving, and this space could be used in a much better way. I mean, that's so I think what we need to be looking at is not using the car, but using other forms, say cycling, using normal bikes or using electric bikes nowadays. I mean, they're around, you can go longer distances. And we know that's possible because many of the car trips are less than 5 kilometers. They can be easily cycled. Unfortunately, most people don't feel safe to cycle. And to be able to get people to cycle, we need safe, segregated cycling lanes. And I think that's often still lacking in cities. So we need to improve this infrastructure to get people to cycle and, of course, reduce the air pollution levels, but also noise and the space that we need actually to get people around. This is a nice example, Utrecht, the Netherlands. You can see a lot of people cycling here. Not many cars on the road. You see a bus in the distance, but this is kind of what we need to be looking for. I mean, healthy people, happy cycling. The pandemic, of course, has helped. I mean, many European cities are increasing cycle infrastructure, getting people to cycle. It's been picked up by the news. I mean, there are many examples now. It's a safe way of getting around. It's a healthy way of getting around. A lot of the people come out of public transport because they didn't trust the public transport, and it's good because if all these people that don't go on public transport would be using the car, we would have so much congestion with cycling that we actually can prevent this. Then the other thing is greening. I think it's extremely important. Too many cities don't have enough green space still, but we need to be greening cities, and you can actually do this. There's a Soel, there's an example where they had a motorway before, got rid of it, made a nice river with green space, a small road, a much more pleasant environment in our own neighborhoods. This is Poblenou in Barcelona. It's on one of the Ramblas to Poblenou, where people can walk around with lots of green space, no cars pass through. But there are cycling lanes on the side, so a much more pleasant environment actually for people to live and work also. That. If you're interested in reading up a bit more about these examples, I recently wrote was published. If you can find it, or if you can't find it, just email me and I can send it to you. Also, we did a couple of books lately around the topic, bringing urban and transport planners together with environment and health people to write from their perspective what I think that actually should be done. Because, you know, one thing I find is within the public health community, with the environmental public health community, people are aware of what are the health impacts of urban and transport planners, but urban and transport planners are often not aware of what are the health effects of their actions. So I think, you know, we need to make them aware, and we need to do the outreach for this. So this is my short talk. If you have any questions, please let me know. It just gives you a bit of an idea what I'm working on, what kind of the ideas I have. I mean, of course, underlying is a lot of epidemiological research and health impact assessment research that we're doing here. But I thought I'd give you just some ideas of what direction we're going and how we do the assessment of these kind of things.
Great. Thank you very much, Mark. So let's get on the first audience question for Mark. Right. Okay. So we have questions from anonymous audience. That great talk, Mark. Like your no work after 7 p.m. rule. What does a normal work day look like for you? Do you try to find a bit of time each day for research?
Do I find for what?
Do you find a bit time each day for research? So
yeah, no, it's I must say most of the time my days, what's happening for me is I get up at 6, trying to get my daughter out of the door, trying to get her to school, and then I'm normally in by about 8 o'clock at work, and starting off with some emails, some talks like this. I mean, I spend quite a bit of time giving talks at the moment. And yes, I mean, do I do research myself? No, in a way not. I mean, I'm managing a team. I haven't done any analysis for ages, of course. So I've got my PhD students, my postdocs, technicians that are doing a lot of work. Most of the time I discuss with them, I guide them what to do, what are the next steps. We discuss, we take decisions. So that's kind of the research involvement that I actually have myself. And then, of course, I mean, what I'm trying to do is network a lot with people, talk to people, and also take enough time to come up with new ideas, which direction we need to go. I mean, because you always need to think about, you know, what is the next step? Where do we need to go? What makes a difference? Where do I get funding for?
Thank you, Mark. We have Mohammed questions. He has 2 questions for you. What are the current and the future trends on environmental epidemiology research? I think you have answered that quite a lot, but if you want to add more, please.
No, yeah, I think I answered this to some extent. Is that, I mean, you know, I think what we're looking at more exposures that we can examine at the same time. We're looking at this kind of exposome research. We're looking at omics data that's been brought in. But then also, you know, we're discovering new research, like at the moment, the COVID research. There's quite a bit going on, looking at the interaction between air pollution or meteorological data and COVID. I mean, I think, you know, no one would have expected that we would be looking at that about a year ago. No one had heard of it, and now we're all doing the research. So, you know, these kind of things are coming up. What I think is also, you see more around climate research, climate crisis research, you know, co-benefits of climate actions, interventions in cities, but then also using interventions with chemicals, for example. We're exposed to so many different chemicals. How can we reduce the burden that we have from chemicals that we're exposed to? What kind of interventions could take, and how can you evaluate this impacts?
Awesome. Thank you, Mark. The second question from Mohammed is, what are the current knowledge or research gaps on cardiovascular and the respiratory burden of disease due to ambient air pollution?
Cardiovascular, I mean, I think probably we know that for cardiovascular and respiratory, air pollution has strong effects, but still we're looking at, you know, what exactly are the air pollutants that may be causing most of the effect. I mean, we know quite a bit about PM10, PM2.5, but about the components of that, we know these are mixtures. So which are the components that are more hazardous, I mean, for these outcomes? What then the other thing is the ultrafine particulates. There's a lot of research interest in this as well. Are they more responsible for the health effects? So is it more particle count rather than particle mass that's important? And then the underlying mechanisms. I think what we're coming to understand, what is through omics data, we're using omics, what are the particular pathways that are being activated? We know about inflammation, but there are other things as well. What's happening and then I think the other part is, what is the interaction with underlying diseases? I mean, when you think about, cardiovascular disease, we know obesity is quite important. But how does the interaction of obesity, air pollution, and cardiovascular disease work? I mean, is it additive? Do we see other things? I mean, so I think these are some of the more important questions, particularly because, our populations are getting a bit more overweight. And so this becomes more of an issue. That some other work that I've been involved is also what is the interaction between physical activity and air pollution. There are now some studies on this as well, because when you do physical activity, you inhale more air pollution, but at the same time, you produce more anti-inflammatory cytokines, for example, so it may prevent you. So the question is, what's happening with this? Oh, well, you disappeared.
I have turned on my light. Getting
right.
back in Sydney, yeah. Okay, so hopefully that is helpful, Mohammed. We have question from Thomas Estelberg. Superb interview and presentation, Mark. I'm wondering what works for translation of our research into policy and practice. Are there particular hooks you have found are particularly effective in the translation process? For example, converting results of particularly environmental interventions into population attributable fractions. DALI, such as?
Yeah, hi Thomas. Good to know you're there as well. Yeah, translation, it's not so easy. That I must say we're struggling with that, and we're not doing so well. I mean, if you look, for example, at air pollution research that's now being picked up by the WHO, we have the air quality guidelines, and but they're still new and we're still going on into legislation. And if it comes down to, say, cities, what kind of the interventions, often cities take decisions, make interventions based on for climate reasons, sustainability, but not necessarily for health. And then when it comes to translating from, what do people pick up? I mean, you may not always be, or you may be surprised at times, because, when you think about city councils may find it more important that that they can prevent childhood asthma, for example, by reducing air pollution rather than mortality, because often for mortality they think, oh, it's old people that die. I mean, or they don't see the link, while they see the link with childhood asthma, for example, because that's kind of what people have. I mean, of course, other outcomes. I mean, for us, from the health impact assessment, mortality is an important outcome. It's definite and carries a big weight. People understand when you talk about DALIs, people don't understand exactly, so it's hard to explain. I think the important thing is also, whenever you present the results, when it depends on what kind of audience you have. I mean, a scientific audience, you present your results in a different way and you give different outcomes than when you say do to policymakers or do to citizens. We've got a number of citizen science projects here as well, where we work with citizens. And of course, what kind of information they want, what they understand is quite different to, say, an academic. So you need to, make sure that you get the right message across. And that's not so easy for us as academics, because we're so geared towards our own, we know a lot and thinking what we think is important for others, but that's not necessarily the case. So that's, for example, why we have the initiative here on knowledge translation, to repackage everything, make it in very simple language. We have a communication team that working on this, and of course we're having regular contact with stakeholders in the city council to talk about what they think is important, how they want to have things packaged. And also when you look at policy makers, in particular politicians, what they want to see, is there out in the general population, is there sufficient support for making changes? Generally, people don't want to make changes. They want to keep the things what they are. People are very conservative, and so you need to have a very good argument to make changes.
Thank you, Mark. We have Asuko Araki, our councillor members of AWPC, ask you a question. So Asuko said, thank you very much for your informative talk. Environmental epidemiology is multidiscipline, and I find this as a very interesting part of the field. Do you have any idea how to let new people in this field? I guess is how to guide people to know more about this field, if my understanding right, Asuko?
Yeah, I think, I guess coming into the field, you need some training. So it's about bringing environmental epidemiology into different training courses. You know, if you look, for example, at medicine, they get some training on epidemiology, but not much on environmental epidemiology. Or as what I said, if you look at transport planners, urban planners, I mean, they don't get any, generally no courses on epidemiology or environmental epidemiology. So if you want to drag people into this, yes, you need to give them the basics of what is environmental epidemiology, trying to get them to go to masters in public health that often have some kind of environmental component, or special courses that are online, and so teach people, I mean, to get them interested. For us, I mean, here at ISEE Global, we're involved in a couple of master programs, Masters of Public Health, Masters in Global Health, and some of the people that are in the masters are interested in environmental epidemiology and also environmental health impact assessment. So we try to train them, we try to raise their enthusiasm, say what are the possibilities, and but also telling that the community is actually fairly small, and you get to know people quite quickly that are around. So and that we need to expand this community, and that they can actually make a contribution to this community by, you know, pursuing a career in this area.
Great. Thank you, Mark. And I think this is one of the reasons that we having today's webinar, that we're hoping that we could inspire people and also connect our members and also bring new members in research in this big family. Thank you, Mark. We now have Julie. Julie Shriwang, this is our elected chair and for ISEE AWPC next year. So Julie's question is, thank you so much for the great help, and how to communicate with official or government for the good policy of green and healthy people in the city. Any tips or experiences to share?
Hi, Julie. Great you're there. Yeah, no, it's not so easy, and it depends on the context. I mean, I think, you know, I can't give you one general message in a way for how to communicate, because I think it's, you know, here we're dealing with many different countries, different cultures, and it's so different if you go one country to the other. I mean, but I think many cities realize that their environment, you know, the air pollution levels, noise levels, have an impact on health. And, you know, if they're receptive to this measure, to this idea, then you can work with them and you can formulate what they should be doing, what we know about it. I mean, and then it's fairly easy. But, you know, on the other side, many city council governors, I mean, they have other priorities. I mean, they look at more economic interests, so they're much more receptive to this kind of ideas. And then it's actually it's quite difficult to bring in environmental issues there. So I'm lucky here in Barcelona. There's quite a bit of interest. I mean, here the Barcelona governors are saying, keep producing your studies. We need to have more knowledge. What is bad for us? What is good for us? We can use this in our policy when we come to discussing policies. We can use this actually, because if there is no knowledge, I mean, then we can't do so much. I mean, and some of it is about hard evidence, some of it is about perception, what people have of what's going on. I mean, and it's a very messy process. It's not just, and as a scientist, it's quite difficult because we're quite rational. We go for the arguments. Of course, when you come to city governance, it's much more messy. There are so many different interests out there, and you need to grab people's attention and come up with something what they need at that particular moment.
Thank you. So now we have Jane. Jane said, sorry, I arrived late. And so you may have answered this. What would be your key piece of advice for successful advocacy to influence policymakers to improve your cities? And then Jane said, I think my question is similar to Thomas, but I guess, Mark, if you have any more to add, please. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I don't know. I mean, it's everywhere it's different. It's hard work. That's what the thing is, that and so it's keeping, having a few messages, clear messages that you want to get across, and keep repeating and repeating and repeating them, that through newspapers, through social media, through citizen science projects, through talking directly to the city councils, and you need to have multiple pathways, hoping that at some stage your message gets picked up and that things are getting done. I think what I've learned over the time is that you always need to be prepared to have things ready, particularly for us policymakers, politicians. They're very busy. They have their things. They have their little hobby horses. They do, and then at once they need to get an answer from you about a particular problem. I mean, they want to have it right away. They want to have it, the next day. So you need to be prepared to give the answer the next day. Don't think about the research circle of 7 years or so when you do things. No, you need to have a message tomorrow, or actually today, I mean, to come up with something. So you need to be ready. You need to be prepared, have the right mindset, saying, this is what I would like to see improved or changed in my city. And these are the messages that I have ready, and they need to be very simple. Generally, they believe you as an expert, and they believe your word. Say this is what it is, and then you can write a whole big report supporting it, but they will never read it. I mean, they want to have the message on one A4 or half an A4.
Thank you, Mark. I think that is very helpful and useful tips for everyone. So we have Farah. Farah asks you, I'm interested to know your idea about mental health, which is quite significant in cities.
Yes, it's a big issue. I mean, I must say, mental health, it's a big issue even before the COVID crisis, and of course the COVID pandemic has made it worse. I think we see many more problems happening, mental health problems. I think it's also to think about, in general, for your brain, mental health, what's related. Our brains were not really made for cities. I think they were made for the jungle. I mean, walking around in nature. I mean, cities are a relatively new development, and getting a lot of people on top of each other, using forms or that are quite squared, not like in nature what you have. So it's, I think our brain is suffering in a way a little bit, and also therefore our mental health. We know that green space, for example, is very good for mental health, reduces mental health problems, reduces anxiety, depression, and that's why we need more nature in the cities. I mean, that greening our cities, I think, is an extremely important part. At the same time, what we're learning now as well, for example, that air pollution can cause inflammation in the brain, can lead to anxiety, depression, and the same for noise. I mean, we know that also has an impact on mental health. So we need to reduce this kind of exposures, reduce air pollution, noise, improve green space. to make it more pleasant environment for people to be and improve their mental health.
Great. Thank you, Mark. And I hope this visual green looks good. Certainly it will be good if you can hear some bird sounds and get some fresh air. So now we have an anonymous audience ask you, are there any tips for an earlier career researcher who would like to get some experience working for a journal, such as associate editor?
So as an early career researcher, I think generally what you have is the first step would go to be on the editorial review board, participate in the journal in that way. So most journals have an editorial board where they ask people to do more reviews, talk about the direction. And then, yes, there are posts for associate editors and editor-in-chief, you know, depending on what are the publishers, they look for different people. I mean, often for associate editors, they look for people that work pretty hard, get the reviews out, get the papers out for reviews, get them back, deal with them. It's a lot of hard work as an associate editor, generally, because you have to, you know, I'm editor-in-chief for Environment International, that's what I said before. Our associate editors probably deal with 100 to 200 papers per year that they need to get turned around. So it's a lot of hard work, but it's also rewarding because you get to see the cutting-edge research, what is the latest out there, get some idea that. And then for editor-in-chief, normally they publishers like a more established name, and it's actually the easier job, I think, the editor-in-chief often, because you just select more the papers and go through the review process in the beginning. So, and it's a bit more fun. So, but yeah, if you're interested in journals, you can always write to the editor-in-chief or to the publisher, the managing director, to say that you're interested, and they keep an eye on your career and see how you can contribute.
Great, thank you, Mark. And hopefully this is helpful for you, to our audience who ask a question. We have Na Yan ask you, can I ask you how multi-pollutant model can predict the adverse health outcome broadly in humans?
A multiple pollutant model?
Multi-pollutant, yeah.
So as with the exposome research, where we look at many different pollutants at the same time, is that the idea? Because, yeah, one of the challenges what we have, a lot of the statistical techniques have been set up to deal with one pollutant, one outcome. Also, sorry, just someone is texting me like crazy. That
they heard about our, you know, online session.
Yeah. So what is happening is that, you know, our statistical techniques often can't deal with multiple pollutant models. I mean, so we need to have new statistical techniques that are coming out and that are being developed. And, you know, I'm not too much into statistics, so I won't be able to give you an idea. And also nowadays, you know, there was a question before, what we see in environmental epidemiology is that, you know, we have different disciplines involved. I mean, like environmental epidemiologists, but then statisticians that do their own thing. I mean, here at the IS Global, we have a number of statisticians that provide us with statistical advice and run the analysis, for example, so we don't deal with it anymore because it's becoming so complicated to get the right statistics.
Great. Thank you.
Look at some of our work that's coming out from IS Global and you see what can be done.
Great. Thank you, Mark. And please follow the IS Global Twitter and the website and the Mark site, and I'm sure there will be more new works published soon. So we have another anonymous audience ask, I'm wondering to what extent might be lockdowns due to the COVID-19 pandemic increase people's sensitivity to their local environment and the desire to improve it. What are your thoughts, Mark?
Yeah, so one of the things is, I think, for the lockdowns is that people can't travel so far. I mean, so they're probably you know, paying more interest to what's happening around them. That also what we've seen in many places for the lockdown is that it can reduce air pollution levels considerably. I mean that in particular, if you look, for example, NO2, we see many cities that have the 40 to 60% reduction in NO2. For PM2.5, it's different. There's some reduction, some increase, depending where you look at. The picture is not so clear, but people can see that there can be improvements. I mean, also when we had the lockdown here in Barcelona, I mean, I loved it in a way because it was quiet, not many cars on the street. I mean, people could walk around, so it was a much nicer environment. And people have learned a little bit, I think, from the different lockdowns, and you know, think from, oh, we can actually make improvements. Now the question is, you know, can we keep that energy going? Can we get people organized? Can we make get them to ask the politicians to make changes? I mean, and that's always the big question. And you know, these are challenging times. Many people lose their job. I mean, and it's very stressful. We mentioned mental health before. So yeah, hopefully people pay more attention to the local environment and try to improve it. But I think it depends on the local context if you can do that or not, and how the communities are organized. But I all encourage it to try to make your neighborhood carbon neutral, livable, and also you know, healthier.
Great. Well, thank you, Mark. And you know, if our audience have more questions coming in, please type, because we only have maximum 10 minutes left with Mark. But I would like to take this opportunity when you know, if there are no more questions coming or people are typing, I would like to ask you a couple questions. I think one is that earlier this audience asked, especially now when you talk about transport, so like Sydney used to, in the morning, a lot of people get on the train or the motorway, but clearly now we can see a massive reduction about transport, public transport. I'm wondering whether even when this pandemic finished, a lot of companies, they already learned that they actually people can work from home. So how this may have, you know, make a major changes about the way people travel, how often they travel, and then this have impact on the infrastructure.
Yeah, so I think that's an interesting development. A lot of people have worked out that they actually can work at home. I mean, and they even enjoy it. In particular, you know, I think there was this very interesting research piece where they ask people if they, what was the question? If they liked working at home or not, if they liked telecommuting or not, and they looked at it by transport mode. And I think 90% of the people that commuted by car to work, they actually liked teleworking, and they were very happy that they could work at home. Then about 50% of the public transport users, they were happy to telework and be at home, and the other one wanted to still come to the office. And then when it came to the cyclist, only 10% was happy with teleworking, and 90% wanted to keep working at the office, partly because they saw the travel, the commute by bicycle to the office as an important part of their life. And so they very much enjoy that. And it's the same for me. I'm in the office. I live 15 minutes cycling from my office, and I cycle along the beach. And one reason to come into the office is that I get my cycling rights to go home. And so that's, I think that's very pleasant. I think what we see in the future, that people will 1 or 2 days a week work at home. So that's in a way good. It reduces mobility. Now the other thing what we have to think about is though that if people work at home, they may need to get heating at home when it's cold outside, or air conditioning when it's hot outside, and that takes quite a bit of energy and produces also emissions, you know, and there is some concern, because if you think about particular particulate matter, I mean, a large part of it is it's coming from residential heating in places. So this may actually increase pollution in cities if a lot of people are working at home, what they normally would be doing, and you know, they turn down the heating during the day. Now it may be keeping going because they're there. So there are advantages and disadvantages potentially, but I don't know if anyone's looked at this in more detail, but this is kind of anecdotally what I've heard.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. And also you mentioned, you know, the cycling lane, and I really love it because Even Sydney is quite hilly, such as from my home to the university. But with the electronic bicycle, it's possible and not that difficult. But what's a really challenge is that finally you feel a bit safe that you can cycling where the cycle lay, but it's really hot. I mean, in Sydney, we are already getting hotter, but there's not much tree canopies, and it's essentially just you have to, when you get to its office, even just 15 minutes cycling past that, it's actually very difficult. Yeah. So
yeah, no, it's a challenge, because people always think from that bad weather is for cycling, but at least against bad weather, I mean, against rain, you can dress yourself. I grew up in the Netherlands, and rain or snow or whatever, you were always cycling. I mean, if it was cold, you cycled a bit faster, and you will get warm. When it's hot, it's a bit more of a challenge. And because you can't release your heat in a way, and so and I think that's where it comes in, that we need more greening in cities. Because what you would think is that also you get cycling paths. First of all, I told you need cycling paths, but it would be good to have cycling paths where there are trees along, because we know that trees really reduce the temperature for people. I mean, it's much more pleasant, trying to cycle through green space. I mean, it's much more pleasant than when you do it in open air. And so this is the interaction between physical active transportation, physical activity, and green space. I think what's extremely important, and we need to look at design this much better. Of course, many cities at the moment, they don't put trees along the roads because they're always afraid that the trees fall down and fall on people or on cars. Is a lot of maintenance. I see the picture behind you. There's some trees actually in the middle of the road. Probably they're not so big in a way, because for city councils it's quite expensive to maintain all the trees and to make sure that they don't fall over. And so that's something that needs more investment in this as well. But it's an important aspect.
Thank you, Mark. We have a couple more questions from our audience. So one of the audience asked, could virtual reality help make our advocacy for healthier cities more compelling?
Virtual reality. Yeah, we did some work on that. We have a Blue Health project where we look at virtual reality. It's kind of appealing. I mean, virtual reality can work a little bit. I mean, that there are some studies. If you go to the dentist and you have virtual reality, you see some nature, you feel less pain, or people have some benefits of that. But you have to be a bit careful, because for example, older people that live in residences, you could say they don't need to go outside anymore. They just give them virtual reality, put them in the chair, and then they get the benefits. I mean, and I think that's not the idea in this way. So you need to see how it's being used, and for sometimes it may help, but I think real nature, really going out, is probably a much better form of for health than using virtual reality.
Yeah, I agree with you, Mark. I think virtual reality could be very helpful, but it's very difficult to replace about sunshine, birds, and nice smells. And otherwise, I thought we probably were living the Matrix. But this is a really...
Although, I must say that looking at your picture with the green space behind you, it's really pleasant. I mean, I love to look at that, and I think, oh, Wizard was in that park there. So I'm sure it has some kind of impact on my mood.
Great, thank you. And that's only let us think about when you travel to see the world. Well, actually, the question, this one is actually for me. Mohammed asked me, thank you that you posted my questions. Is the webinar recorded? The answer is yes. And I would like to have a copy of the recorded session. You won't have a copy of the recorded session, but we will make this recorded video available either where ISEE AWPC website or where the ISEE YouTube channel. So eventually this will be available, and we will let you know. So please follow up with the Twitter and also our website. Thank you.
Yeah, by the way, can I just promote also the ISEE website, the general one, iseeapi.org, I think it is. Also, we have a YouTube channel, and there are also already videos on there for recorded keynotes at the conference, and also other lectures. So go there, I mean, and can see what you can, you know, perhaps there is something useful for you that if you want to learn something. I think also like the keynotes from last year from Utrecht conference are on there. I mean, and they're very informative. So I suggest you visit the website, and hopefully we can put this video also there on the YouTube channel, so can people look at it.
Thank you very much. Very generous and brilliant. I would like to say thank you very much, Mark, and also to our audience. I'm Michelle. See you all at the next ISEE AWPC Career and the Research Talk.
Many thanks. It was a great pleasure to be here, and enjoy your evening and have a great time. And all become members of ISEE. It's an important organization, and we can make a change if we're doing it all together.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.